Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today we are going to start with the concept of the consumer surplus. By consumer surplus we mean it is a difference between your willingness to pay for a good and price that you actually pay for that good. Now if the difference between these two concepts, the willingness to pay and the price that you actually pay, is positive, it means your welfare has been improved. If the difference between these two concepts is negative, it means that your welfare has been decreased. Now, your willingness to pay depends directly upon your concept that how much you value that good. The more you value that good, it means more you will be willing to pay for that good. Less you value that good, it means less you will be willing to pay for that good. And the price that you pay for certain good or the services being charged, what is being decided by the seller. Now, how this consumer surplus concept can be used by a manager while taking decisions. Now, the consumer surplus will prove particularly useful in marketing and other disciplines, emphasizing strategies like value pricing and the price discrimination. Now, value pricing means you have to charge the price to a customer equal to the value what he or she is giving to that good. That represents the first degree price discrimination. It means that if someone is willing to pay the 500, you are going to charge 500 for that good. If someone is going to pay 700 for that good, you will be charging 700 for that good. That is not possible for all the goods and the services. This example could be seen in case of the surgeons, doctors, or in case of the lawyers. It means they charge the price equal to the willingness to pay of a certain customer, so extracting all the consumer surplus out of it. And the price discrimination concept means that the same good is being sold to different customers at the different prices. We will study this in detail while considering the concepts of the pricing strategies. We will discuss it in detail over there. Now, how we are going to measure the consumer surplus? Consumer surplus concept can be measured with the help of the demand curve. As you know that the demand curve is the negatively sloped. Now each and every point of this demand curve represents the willingness to pay. Now demand curve is actually constructed with the help of the willingness to pay. Now this is your demand curve, and each and every value, each and every point on this demand curve is representing the willingness to pay. Now suppose that the price which is being charged to you, it is equal to 2. It means by selling one product, the consumer was willing to pay $8, and the price which was actually charged to him was equal to the 2. Now the difference between 8 and 2 is equal to 6. Now the consumer surplus of the first customer is equal to 6. Now what about the second quantity? The willingness to pay of the customer was equal to 6, and he is willing to pay about $2, and the price which was actually charged to him was the 2. Now difference between these two is going to represent the consumer surplus, that is equal to the $4, and here it is equal to the $2. Now it is equal to 8 minus 2 is equal to 6, 6 minus 2 is equal to 4, and the 4 minus 2 is equal to 2. Now by adding 6 plus 4 plus 2 is equal to the $12. Now this is a discrete case. Discrete case means we are able to find out for individual quantity and the individual seller what it is consumer surplus, and we can find out when we draw this stepwise demand curve. As you have already discussed it in the course of the principles of economics, that how you can draw these stepwise demand curves. When we draw the stepwise demand curve, the case for the consumer surplus is always the discrete case. Now this is the continuous case. Continuous case means instead of drawing the stepwise demand curve, we have to draw a straight line demand curve. Now this is the area below the demand curve and above the price. That is going to represent the consumer surplus. Now this consumer surplus will be greater as compared to that of the previous one, because in case of the previous one we have taken the discrete case, and in case of the discrete case we are going to take a stepwise demand curve in which a little triangles are missing. As you can see, if we compare it with this, look, these small triangles are missing. We haven't evaluated these small 4 triangles while evaluating the surplus in case of the discrete case, while we will consider these small triangles in case of the continuous case. So this is all the area which is below the demand curve if the price which is being settled by the seller is equal to the $2. Now the consumer surplus is actually it is the area below the demand curve and above the price. So this whole triangle is going to represent the value of the consumer surplus, and the formula of the consumer triangle is equal to half into length into base. Now half into length, what do you mean by the length? This is the difference between 10 and 2, and base, it is the difference between 0 and 4. It means half into 8 into 4, and the value of the consumer surplus will be equal to $16. Half into length was equal to 8. 8 into 0.5 is equal to 4, and 4 into 4 is equal to the 16. So this whole area is equal to the 16. As all the points on this demand curve are representing the willingness to pay of the customers, and this too is represent the price which they actually pay. Now the area below the demand curve and above the price, it is going to represent the consumer surplus. This was the same the case in case of the discrete, but in case of the discrete we have taken the stepwise demand curve, but in case of the continuous case we have taken the continuously demand curve, in which those small triangles are also included. So this consumer surplus is greater as compared to that of the previous. That previous was 12 and this is of 16. Now the demand curve has been completed. After completing the demand curve, we have come towards the market supply curve. Before discussing the market supply curve, I'll give you the introduction that what you mean by the supply. Supply actually means what a supplier is willing and able to supply. Now, a willingness to supply means what he want to conquer, what we want to, what quantity, what units of the quantity he wants to sell in the market. And the ability means whether he or she has got the resources to cover up that market. That represents the supply. From the supply we get the law of supply, and the law of supply states that by keeping all the other things constant, there exists a positive relationship between the price and the quantity. And I'm using again the phrase of the by keeping the other things constant. It means we have taken some assumptions, and according to those assumptions, if we're going to keep those assumptions constant, then there exists a positive relationship between the price and the quantity supply. The supply curve shows the amount of the good that will be produced at the alternative. Alternative means different pricing, and at law of supply states that the supply curve is positively sloped under certain assumptions. And what are those assumptions? Those assumptions are termed as the supply shifters, or they can be termed as the determinants of the supply. The first thing is the input prices. Input prices means inputs are basically those components which are being used to produce the output. They may be the factor of production, they may be the raw material, land, labor, capital, land, or the raw material, anything like that. Technology or the government regulation. If the technology is going to be kept constant and the government regulations, government taxation, and the other certification remain constant, it means that then there exists a positive relationship between the price and the quantity. Number of the firms. If the number of the firms has been increased, if the number of the firms has been decreased. Entry means the new firm has entered into that market, and exit means that some firm has left the market. Substitutes in the production. Now, what type of good you are producing, how many number of substitutes are being produced in that market by the other firms. Taxes. Excise tax and the ad valorem tax. What type of tax is being levied, or whether on the value or whether on the quantity of your product. And the producer expectation, how the producer perceive the market, whether the producer is optimist or the pessimist. If we are going to keep all these things constant, input prices, technology or the government regulation, number of firms, substitutes in the production, taxes, and the producer expectations, then there exists a positive relationship between the price and the quantity. Otherwise, if one of these things are going to change, then there may be the chances that the relationship between the price and the quantity will not be positive. Positive relationship means if the price is going to increase, the producers are going to supply more of that good. Now, as we have constructed that demand function, same is the case of the supply function. So, supply function is an equation representing the supply curve. Now, QXS represents the good X quantity, and it is showing displayed, and it is a function of its own price of the related goods, W stands for the prices of the inputs. H stands for the other variable affecting supply, whether it can be the expectations, whether it can be the number of the firms, any other thing. We can specify it like that. So if we are going to present all the variables in this form, in a functional form, that is going to represent the supply curve, where Q-axis represents the quantity supplied of the good X, Px stands for the good X, price of the good X, Pr represents the price of the production substitute, any other substitute. Price, W stands for the wages or the prices of the inputs. It could be the rent, it could be the interest, and H stands for the any other variable affecting the supply. Now, inverse supply function. Now, in comparison of the demand function, inverse demand function, there is also the concept of the inverse supply function. Now, supply function was representing the relationship between the quantity and the price of a good, and the relationship was positive. It means that the quantity is dependent upon the price. If we inverse this function, then it will become that the price is a function of the quantity. The same like that, if our supply function is that the Q is equal to 10 plus 2px, we have to take 2px over here and we have to solve it for px. Now, if we have solved it for px, and it becomes equal to px is equal to 5 plus 0.5qx, showing a positive relationship between the price and the quantity. But the difference between these two expressions is that here the quantity of the supply is a function of price, but here the price of that good is a function of the quantity. So majorly we use the concept of the inverse demand function while analyzing the comparative static analysis in terms of the different market structures. Now, this is the supply curve. While in case of the supply curve, we can see that there are only two types of the movements. One type of the movement represents the movement along the curve. The other type of the movement represents the movement of the curve. For example, if we move from here to here on the same curve, then this type of movement is always represents the movement along the curve, and the reason of the movement along the curve is always your independent variable, which is the price in this case. So if we move over here, from here to here, over here, if we have got a movement along the same curve, on the same curve, we have remained on the same curve, whether it is a positive or in the negative direction, it means that is the movement along the curve. And the reason of the movement along the curve, it means that it is only due to the one factor, and that is price. Okay. Changes in the supply. Now, how do the supply curve moves from its direction? That represents the movement of the curve. All the supply shifters, all the assumptions which we have taken while describing the law of the supply, if any one of that is being changed, that is going to have the impact on the movement of the supply curve. If the supply has been increased, then the supply curve is going to move in this direction. If the supply curve has been decreased, the supply curve has been moved in this direction. So that represents the movement of the curve, and the movement of the curve is only and only due to the change in the assumptions of the law of the demand, but not some other thing. It could be of any other, the reason could be of any type, but not the price. But in this case, it is not this. Movement along the curve happens only due to the change in the price, but the movement along the curve happens only due to the change in the supply shifter. The supply has been increased, it means whether the input prices has been decreased, whether the new technology has been adopted, whether the government regulations have been relaxed, whether the number of the firms have been increased. It could be of many reasons. Okay, it represents the increase in the supply. So from the supply curve, we have this concept that represents the producer surplus. Now, the consumer surplus was representing the quality of life or the welfare on the part of the consumers, and the producer surplus is going to measure the welfare on the part of the producers. So, producer surplus is simply the profit. The more the profit a person has, it means more the producer surplus is, the less the profit the producer has, it means less the producer surplus is. The amount the producer receives in excess of the amount necessary to induce them to produce more. It means that this is your supply curve, and all the points on this supply curve is going to represent the cost of production. So, all the points on this, the yellow dot is represent as I am moving this yellow dot, you can see that all the points on this supply curve is representing the cost of production, and the difference of the cost of the production and the price, it represents your profit. We will discuss in the next part. Till then, okay.